Hi everyone, this is Kenzo, Dave, and Stepan, and we are Team 6. We're going to be talking today about how No Child Left Behind has affected the practice of school district superintendents. So over the past few decades, local control has lessened in education, and there have been more state and federal level controls that have been put in place. With Common Core being enacted, that centralization has become even greater, and as states have started to lose control, kind of making way for federal initiatives. This all kind of started with No Child Left Behind back in 2001. When No Child Left Behind was first enacted, the thought was that schools would be, the students would test on campuses, and especially in math, reading, and science, and that by 2014, every student would be proficient, and therefore no child will be left behind. Of course, 2014 is less than 2 months away, and we know now that that is not going to happen. This is, of course, a reason for us to kind of rethink our approach in setting up NCLB and what we're going to do moving forward as we think about new initiatives to impact education. So the pressures of accountability that started with No Child Left Behind have greatly changed the role of superintendent over the last 13 years. And here we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. One of the biggest ways that the superintendent's role has changed is in terms of decision making. In addition to No Child Left Behind, just the advancements in technology have created ways for us to look at much more data and to kind of use that data for decision making. And because with the increased social networking options, people are more connected than ever, and therefore they're more connected to the decisions that are going to impact the school. So more stakeholders kind of have a say with technology and with the data that is presented across the board. These are complex social problems. They don't have simple solutions. And we have many systems that are taking the data from schools and sharing it with the rest of the world. You can find information about most any school or school district on the internet these days. So the decisions aren't just being made behind closed doors in boardrooms, but people are well aware of them and know what factors are impacting the decisions that superintendents make. There's also an accountability piece. Typically, accountability has been aimed to evaluate and assess teacher and student performance. This connection was amplified with No Child Left Behind, and some either districts or CMOs actually started talking about how teacher performance should have compensation that goes along with it, or teachers can be let go based on their performance. O'Day mentions in our book that there's two major issues that come up with accountability in this regard. First is that if schools are, one assumption is that if schools are given the information about how they're performing, that they'll take the proper action with the student data. Most of the things we read about in No Child Left Behind talk about the data and how it needs to improve. However, they don't really talk about what those proper steps would be in order for schools to use that data to actually improve student achievement. And second is that the assumption is that external forces can impact the internal workings of a school. So there are all kinds of factors that impact student achievement. Some of them are outside the school, and No Child Left Behind doesn't really take those into account. These are not making excuses, but they're factors that need to be considered in order to reach students to help them to be successful. Students from different backgrounds have different needs that they need to be met in order for them to be successful. Even within a district like EDLA Unified, there are wide varieties of backgrounds that students come from. On a national level, that's amplified even further. So despite these assumptions, No Child Left Behind requires schools to demonstrate progress through AYP, adequate yearly progress, in student achievement across all demographic groups. So it does do a good job of really breaking down how different groups are performing. However, it doesn't really talk about sources for why certain groups are performing and what specific steps can be taken to help those specific groups perform better. No Child Left Behind also requires superintendents to have more expertise when it comes to curriculum and instruction. So their role is not just about budgets and operations, but they really do need to have a really deep understanding of what it's like to be in the class. This can be a controversial topic when it comes to how superintendents have been selected in the past. In the past, we've had military sergeants, others from different backgrounds outside of education take on the superintendent role. And now that's become more controversial than ever because you potentially have, it's kind of an expectation that superintendents need to know more about curriculum and instruction. Even at the principal level, it's more about than just operations these days. You need to observe teachers and evaluate them in line with the standards. And so if it's happening at the principal level, even the superintendent level, those kind of expectations have kind of been established across the board. Superintendents must also better understand data analysis, and there's a lot of it out there, a lot of data out there for them to look at. They need to be able to make decisions based on the data and the performance assessments. But again, going back to that assumption, what steps need to be taken has not been made clear up to this point. So as a result of No Child Left Behind, schools are spending a lot more time on reading and math, sometimes at the expense of other subjects. We've all seen schools where programs like art, technology, and other electives get cut as more reading remediation or math support classes take their place in order to help students perform well on those standardized assessments. Another aspect of No Child Left Behind that superintendents need to consider is the teachers who are actually doing the teaching. They're the most critical element of school success. And according to No Child Left Behind, teachers must be highly qualified. And of course, what highly qualified means differs from state to state. In a lot of states, highly qualified just involves having the right degree and right credential. We all know that that's not enough to have a teacher be very effective. There's more to it than that, but they need to quantify somehow, and in many ways they've kind of settled on that. So one concern that this has is attracting highly qualified teachers to teaching positions that are most critical. So the schools that need really high-performing teachers are usually the schools that are struggling the most. And with No Child Left Behind, the performance results of those schools are advertised, and across the internet, everyone has access to them, and people see how poorly a school is doing. And when they see how poorly a school is doing, teachers tend to not go and seek out positions at those schools. So the schools that are performing the worst tend to not attract the highly qualified teachers, and so the cycle continues until you have teachers who are not performing well working at the schools that need the most help. No Child Left Behind requires superintendents to focus on ensuring that teachers are trained and are in the right places to help students be successful, but there are some inherent flaws with the system, as we just kind of reviewed, when it comes to using data to show a school's performance and that impact that has on attracting those highly qualified teachers to a school.
The superintendents interviewed in the study suggest that there's a powerful effect that No Child Left Behind has on district administrators, and the appropriation, the distribution, and the sustenance of resources for learning and instruction, to the extent that flexibility can seriously be diminished. Without sufficient yearly progress toward proficiency, schools will first be targeted for assistance, followed then by corrective action, and ultimately restructuring. Any school district identified for corrective action must put aside and spend up to 20% of their Part A Title I funding for students whose parents exercise an option for choice-related transportation to another school site and supplemental educational services. Now, districts are not absolutely forced to use Title I allocations for these things, but they have to get it somewhere. And even that is restricted to allowable federal, state, local, or private sources that superintendents had possibly earmarked for other more pressing local educational priorities. And this isn't the only financial effect that's felt by districts. They face other costs if corrective actions are mandated. No Child Left Behind also states that aside from parent choice-related costs, any school targeted for corrective action may have to find resources to replace their school staff, design and implement a new curriculum, decrease management authority at the school, possibly appoint an outside consultant, usually at a very high cost, to advise the district, possibly extend the school day or year, and even reorganize the school itself. Even though there's great specificity on sanctions for schools that fail to make adequate annual progress, the statute doesn't operationally define any real limitations or allowances for these punitive results, as many superintendents put it. Superintendents have to become experts regarding the remarkable new costs that are posed by these situations and advocates for access to resources that may or may not be available through the state to assist low-performing schools. State funds that superintendents can advocate for and can possibly tap into might include technical assistance for school improvement, corrective action that might include restructuring, funds for after-school and summer school programs, funds for rewarding schools and teachers for closing the achievement gap over 2 consecutive years. Now, according to the 15 superintendents who were interviewed for this study, a significant part of the successful superintendent's expertise under the auspices of No Child Left Behind must be the ability to define and act upon resources available with the greatest amount of flexibility they can put together, given the restraints of the day and the state their district resides in. The successful superintendent has to be sort of a resource ninja, expertly identifying and advocating for the receipt of identified funds, allocating them flexibly within the constraints of No Child Left Behind and other state guidelines, and creatively maintaining and applying the resources that he or she can appropriate with all of the jurisdictional authority that they can possibly muster. No Child Left Behind mandates that parents are to receive information on the academic progress of their children, the performance of their schools, and to be involved in meaningful ways with school officials. This is all about data and parental access to it, understanding of it, and options to act upon it. No Child Left Behind combines parents armed with data, fully grasping its application, along with a full knowledge of schooling options in an effort to bring them into a shared decision-making and accountability process to guarantee their children a quality education. For the first time ever, No Child Left Behind combines school choice with district and school accountability to allow parents of children in underperforming schools the opportunity to choose higher performing schools. And just as a personal aside here, the stated mission of Catholic schools, an often cited intention, is to assist the parents as the primary educators of the children, which is a goal that's more often spoken than it's met. But I find it very ironic that it is the public sector that has actually codified the mission that Catholic schools claim but don't always accomplish. District leaders in public schools tended to agree in this survey or interviews that parental and community involvement has a positive influence on improving the quality of schooling, as well as increasing the academic achievement of children. No Child Left Behind fully recognizes the importance of parents and offers parents of children in low-performing schools a wide range of educational options. Parents with children in schools that fail to meet state standards for at least 2 consecutive years can transfer their children to a better performing public school, including a public charter school within their district. And the district has to provide transportation using Title I funds if necessary, like we mentioned before, up to 20% of those funds. Students from low-income families in schools that fail to meet state standards for at least 3 years are eligible to receive tutoring, after-school services, and summer school, and then a myriad of other services. No Child Left Behind provides increased support to parents to create brand new charter schools. Power for change in the case of this level of school failure begins to shift dramatically to parents. And after 5 consecutive years of inadequate progress, schools are absolutely required to restructure by converting to a charter school, replacing staff relevant to the failure, hiring an external contractor to operate the school, inviting the state to take over the school, or some other very significant reform that fundamentally changes the school. So, parents now have 2 powerful assets: data and choices, to enable them to make wise decisions about their children's education. However, these assets, according to the superintendents who were interviewed, carry with them some real concerns. Because of a variety of factors, from access to information to a parent's ability to understand the information or the data they've been giving, very few parental choice programs, according to Young in 1999, have ever been successful. Now, since the implementation of No Child Left Behind, many parents are not receiving clear and timely information. Poverty, English proficiency, and varying cultural expectations remain significant barriers to meaningful parental participation. For district superintendents, increased parental choice has a significant effect on their ability to lead. An additional amount of effort and resources now must be reallocated toward parental outreach and education. Student transience continues still to be a challenge and now adds to the difficulties for low-performing schools. Superintendents, despite their own ideas for direction, are now required to make difficult staffing and resource decisions at failing and low-performing schools, and in some cases, they might even lose significant amounts of funding, the opposite of what these schools intuitively might seem to need. Superintendents see this loss of control over their own district, making school improvement very difficult, if not impossible. Interestingly enough, though, difficulties will not impact only those superintendents with low-performing schools. Due to parental choice, high-performing schools could see a significant influx of students from failing schools, creating possible overcrowding in classrooms, strains on district resources planned for other things, resulting in an erosion of the educational experience and performance of their own students. A lack of academic achievement is not the only stipulation that permits parents the option to transfer their children to another school. No Child Left Behind requires states to establish and implement a statewide policy that provides parents the option to petition for transfers to schools under 2 conditions outside of academic and related to safety. 1, if the child attends a persistently dangerous elementary or secondary school, or 2, has been a victim of a violent criminal offense while in or on the grounds of the school he or she attends. Offering a safe school environment is a very complex situation faced by numerous school leaders attempting to make schools significantly safer than the streets outside and around the school. I'd like you to take a look at a video here.
The nation that had put a man on the moon was finally going to fix education.
And now it's up to you, the local citizens of our great land, to stand up and demand no child, not one single child in America, is left behind.
It was a bold promise, and to make good on that promise, the architects of No Child Left Behind decided to measure every student in the country.
I understand taking tests aren't fun. Too bad. We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
So now it's 8 years later, and we have 4 years left to reach our goal: 100% proficiency in math and reading.
Now, as the video shows, No Child Left Behind was created with good intentions and huge complex goals and consequences. While the video stresses the role of testing and 100% proficiency, the superintendent's perspective puts the implementation of No Child Left Behind into the context of the real world. No Child Left Behind affects the day-to-day professional lives of district superintendents in their efforts to provide a quality education for all students, focusing on assessment and accountability, highly qualified teachers, resource flexibility, and parental choice. and it has realigned the role of district leaders from that of a comprehensive manager to a leader focused on learning and the outcomes of all students. The role of the superintendent and district leader has changed thoroughly, challenging their expertise, their political prowess, an understanding of the needs of children, and the full support for and inclusion of parents who want and are now included in bringing the same quality education. The study examined here looked at each of these areas and addressed the challenges superintendents face in fully implementing and complying with this sweeping federal mandate. 15 district leaders, in terms of data collection and analysis, were selected using a non-random method and interviewed for this study. 7 of them were from California and 8 were from Nebraska, just those 2 states. This investigation was conducted using 15 district leaders, as I pointed out, 7 from California, 8 from Nebraska, using similar protocols in all interviews. A semi-structured ethnographic interview was used using open-ended questions based on four critical areas of the law, which we've mentioned before: assessment, qualified teachers, resource flexibility, and parental choice. I'd like you to take another quick look at a video.
Were deemed to not have made adequate yearly progress last year because they tested less than 95% of students, although they had over 90% of students proficient in reading and math. Yet, so that's a problem for us, is to have 2 of our high schools identified as not having adequate yearly progress, even though students at those 2 high schools do extremely well compared to the rest of the state and the United States. Who cannot get behind that slogan? But I'm not sure that in the end result that's what this legislation is actually doing.
And you can see this is a school leader who is seriously concerned at the effects of No Child Left Behind on his district. And in this video, while not from this particular study, one can imagine how the interviews may have taken place with superintendents, reflecting upon open-ended questions on the 4 areas of No Child Left Behind and the study itself. The interviews explored the attitudes and the perceptions and actual practices of district leaders that would be difficult to measure in any other way other than these interviews. And using recorded transcripts, a systematic examination of each interview was conducted using a 2-part domain analysis. The first part of the analysis required that each interview was analyzed across the question categories. In other words, each individual interview was examined and categorized. In the second part of the domain analysis, responses were examined across districts to look for themes or consistencies in the perceptions of the superintendents. Now, preliminary data from the interviews with district leaders provided what the authors call a rich foundation of information to understand superintendent perspectives on No Child Left Behind in the areas of assessment and accountability, parental choice, resource flexibility, and highly qualified teachers.
So let me preface the overview of the findings given here with the fact that this study suffers from some significant limitations, some of which I'll attempt to address. As you heard before, the investigation was conducted using semi-structured ethnographic interviews with 15 district leaders. In other words, the sample is too small in regards to its size. And when non-random samples are used, it is usually difficult, if not impossible, to describe the population from which the sample was drawn and to whom the results can actually be generalized. That being said, a thorough analysis of the qualitative data revealed that district leaders had a tendency to focus on 4 critical areas of NCLB law. 1, accountability; 2, teacher quality; 3, resource flexibility; and 4, parental choice. Moreover, all superintendents noted the importance of knowledge in the following skill areas: data-driven decision-making, adequate yearly progress, knowledge of assessment instruments, and identification of highly qualified teachers. These are just a few of the tools that superintendents felt would help them to support the achievement of all students, an NCLB mandate. Superintendents also felt that NCLB complicated the deployment of limited resources. Essentially, NCLB forces superintendents to redefine measures of learning and student achievement. Because of this, resources are primarily allocated to the following 4 areas: good teachers, intervention strategies studied by teachers and administrators, alignment of curriculum, and finally, targeted professional development to assist teachers with their work. Although parental choice is a volatile piece of the NCLB law, the 15 superintendents who participated in this particular study indicated that parental demands had not really affected their schools, again calling into question the validity and general applicability of this study. Although district leaders in this study indicate that schools have always been accountable for student learning on some level, and also assert that NCLB has increased awareness of the use of data for purposes of making sound educational decisions, the report does not include a major criticism of NCLB: that many schools are held accountable for results that are based on faulty data. Let's take a look at a video.
And consequently, schools were being graded on data that was faulty. And of course, we were all concerned about that. You're going to place a judgment on a school and a school district that's going to be printed in the papers, going to be very, very public, and yet it's based on inaccurate information. Who wants that?
So here's the perspective of just one superintendent not included in this particular study, but when it comes to the reliability of measurement, the how and the why of accountability, it would seem that this particular superintendent illustrates the concerns felt by many others, but however is a major failing of this chapter. It is in its blatant disregard for any mention of inaccurate information that could be used to deem a school as underperforming. The cartoon, the satirical cartoon here on the right, highlights the reality of resource allocation and distribution. Certainly the country's larger economic turmoil only complicates matters in regards to NCLB. It becomes far easier and perhaps to identify the values of a culture when resources are limited. And in the context of this discussion, we can simply look to where the majority of financial resources are in fact dedicated. 7 of the 8 superintendents in Nebraska stated that they invested a greater percentage of their budget to specific professional development programs to assist teacher and improve instructional strategies. But how are they assisting their teachers, and what instructional strategies are they trying to improve? Well, it would seem that testing, teaching to the test, teaching how to take the test would be among those things, and we must therefore beg the question, at the expense of what? Before we take a look at the next clip, I would like to pose several questions for the audience to think about. What are the costs in terms of dollars and time that have been incurred by parents and school districts as a result of NCLB? Are districts allocating more resources to professional development programs for all teachers? Has there been an increase in expenditures for curriculum alignment, instructional interventions, testing and assessment materials, and new curricular materials? And have school district budgets been modified in any meaningful way in an attempt to address issues raised by the passage of NCLB?
We're cutting programs because of budget crunches, but yet we are expected to spend all this money to test children.
The amount of money that the state, or actually the federal government, has made available for this is not going to cover the cost of implementation and also certification. And again, I don't think it's as much of a problem for us as a district, because we're very fortunate to have resources, although they continue to dwindle. But I think the urban and the rural areas will definitely experience more difficulty.
So here you can see superintendent responses focused on what they believe were the larger and more public meaning of parental choice. Many schools in California had open enrollment and homeschooling policies in place well before the passage of NCLB. The law is discouraging because a lot of superintendents felt that it indicated to families that education is a broken and failed enterprise. For NCLB to tell parents if they're dissatisfied they can change schools seems to be short-sighted. There are, in fact, too many other factors involved in what a child needs to succeed academically and socially. None of the superintendents viewed parental choice as anything new or threatening in this particular study, although it seems as if it would be a pretty significant issue in the current climate of education, particularly in Los Angeles. And I would be interested, as I'm sure the rest of our group here would be, to hear some of your perspectives on this topic in the discussion portion of our project. Putting highly qualified teachers in the classroom ensures American schools will be able to meet the challenges of teaching in a rapidly growing and diverse student population, and many would argue that placing a high-quality teacher in front of every student in the nation is the most important thing schools can do to improve student achievement. In 2005-2006, 88% of school districts reported that teachers of core academic subjects met the NCLB definition of highly qualified. However, even though school districts may be in compliance with NCLB's teacher quality provision, this does not ensure increases in student achievement. Several superintendents stated that their districts continued to experience shortages of qualified teachers, especially in certain subject areas, as well as teachers of special education, and in California particularly, teachers prepared to teach English learners. Let's face it, providing a rich and stimulating learning environment is complicated, but attracting and retaining highly qualified teachers may prove just as problematic. Daniel Koretz, professor of education at Harvard, here discusses this idea in the context of current reforms.
One of the single most important things we have to do is to make teaching a more attractive profession. There's a lot of argument about one piece of this. Would pay for performance make teaching more or less appealing to the people we want to have teaching? I think the jury's out on that. But I think it's fair to say that in general, the quality of the teaching force has taken second place in the current round of reforms. There's an edict that we must somehow have highly qualified teachers everywhere. But how do we get them? You have to convince people to do it first, and you have to convince them not to leave. A lot of people leave teaching because they find it a very stressful and unsatisfying role. So I think we need to go back to square one and say, since we know that American education has some chronic deficiencies, what can we say about the causes of those deficiencies? What can we say about the impediments that stand in the way of doing better? And when we don't know, we ought to go look. We ought to go into schools, do hard research to figure out which of the impediments really matter, and then craft policies that try to chip away at those impediments, instead of doing what we've done for 30 years, which is just make it up. Make up a policy, drop it on schools, and see what happens. Or more often than not, fail to see what happens because we drop these things into schools without putting in place the kind of monitoring that kids deserve.
So I guess the question is, what now? We're left with several significant questions to be answered, and it's reasonable to assume that a flawed law will not receive the adjustment it likely deserves. School leaders must contend with state and federal mandates to increase student achievement and leave no child behind without the benefit of a focused national dialogue regarding remedy or elimination of NCLB. But we're still left with lots of questions regarding NCLB and its impact not only on superintendents, but teachers, principals, parents, and students. The issue of whether American citizens perceive American public education to be best managed at the federal, state, or local levels should receive serious attention.